Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
What should you expect from your financial institution? What should you or your employees do when you're trying to obtain a loan while working in this industry? Peter Su from Hanover Bank joins us today to talk about all things cannabis banking. Peter has started not just one, not just two, but three cannabis banking programs. And he joins us to talk about what he's learned while working in the cannabis industry. This was such a great conversation. I hope you guys enjoy. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Tommy, how's it going? How are you? Thank you for having me.
You have quite the experience in the banking industry, let alone the cannabis industry as well. You started 3 cannabis programs. Based on what you've seen, what should someone look for in a cannabis banking solution?
Oh, sure. I think I would look for experience as a number one. And I know that's a little hard to determine, but I mean, just bluntly ask, right? Like, hey, are you, meaning the bank, have you guys done this before? How many accounts do you have? There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it used to be common where banks would get in and get out. Meaning they try it and then they're like, yeah, this didn't work or whatever, or it's too much work, we can't make enough money, and then they get out. And that's disruptive to the business, right? You're talking about closing accounts, changing all your payments, et cetera, et cetera. Affects your payroll, right? Like if you're hooked up with Kaya Push, now you gotta change all your payment information. So experience to me is a big one because it suggests anyway that the bank has gone down this road of ways and they're ready to move forward, to do more. The other is, you just don't want to put up with frustrating, dumb questions, right? Like you're going to get questions like from the bank and you're going to be like, what are you talking about? Like what, do you understand the industry? That's more just annoyance rather than anything else. But yeah, that to me is the big one. Like does your banker, your actual point of contact, do they understand it? Two, how long has the bank been doing this?
Hanover is your 3rd cannabis banking program.
Yeah.
Number 3. And not a lot of people have that opportunity to create a program, see what's wrong with it, make some changes, and do it 3 times over. What have you learned in your first 2 times, your 2 times go around, and what is different about your current program?
Oh, this time around, I kind of wanted something. I did want something different, something pretty specific, and it's actually very simple. I wanted to be able to treat cannabis businesses like normal businesses. So, I mean, to the extent that the regulations allow us, obviously, right? Like, of course, we worry about third parties, but to the extent that we can treat a cannabis business like any other customer that's walking through the door, that's what I wanted. And that is something that I've always felt was missing in the other programs I've worked on. And I was also a consultant for a bit, so I've actually worked on, as a consultant, I consulted with dozens of programs around the country. And a commonality I would always find is that there would be a reluctance. So, for example, and you may have heard this, there's certain banks, for example, you can bank there, but you can't go into the branches. Just as an example, even if the branch is like literally across the street, you cannot. You're not. They won't say this, but it's like you're not welcome to come in. You're a different customer. Maybe they don't make certain services available to you, right? Like you go on their website and you see, oh, you're advertising this product, you're advertising this rate. Oh, yes, we are, but it's not available to you.
Got it.
Why is that? There's a variety of reasons for it, but my basic driver was I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to say, again, to the extent possible, to the extent reasonable, that no, look, Tommy, you're a customer. Whatever the bank does, we're going to make available to you as well.
That's brilliant. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I had no idea that. It's great to see that we've gone such a long way.
Yeah.
In destigmatizing our industry.
Yeah.
And banking is such a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Is there any restrictions that Hanover Bank has compared to other banks that are not serving the cannabis industry?
I'm not aware of any. Again, we have certain things that happen in the background from a compliance, monitoring, risk profiling perspective that might make a cannabis business, different than a quote unquote normal business. But again, I would put it in the same category as any other high risk bank, any other high risk customer that the bank has. Now, as I mentioned, there are third parties sometimes involved, right? And they may or may not have their own rules. So I'll give an example, like credit cards. So we under normal circumstances, we issue business debit cards through one of the associations. So we're a member of the same associations everyone else is, right? But they're not cannabis friendly, and thus we cannot. So in that scenario, that's not our decision per se, right? We're just conforming to the rules that have been given to us. But if it's something that we are able to full cycle decide all the way through, there's no restrictions.
I get this asked a lot as employees and people working in the cannabis industry, and they're, normal course of business. You apply for a loan, you apply for a mortgage, etc.
Yeah.
What is some of the advice that you can give to these individuals that are making a career in their industry but may not have access to certain facilities?
That's starting to go away, and pretty quickly, I think. So, to your point, I feel like even as recently as, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I used to get calls all the time. Someone would say, oh, my employee couldn't get a mortgage, right? I have a couple of different schools of thought on it, but I'll start with the good news. The good news is those calls have largely stopped. I very rarely get those calls anymore. And when I get them, they seem to be solvable. Like whether I can do it or I know someone that can do it. However, a couple of things I should point out, right? Let's say you're talking about a mortgage, so you're filling out a mortgage statement. There's actually a uniform mortgage statement that is commonly used, and there's like a code for it. I forget, it's 5408 or something like that. And it is in fact just that. It's the uniform mortgage, whatever. It's actually like you could like go on to like Fannie Mae's website, like download it, So just food for thought, really. So Tommy, you're filling out a mortgage statement. There's going to be a statement like the application, and if you read it, it actually says, I hereby attest that blah blah blah, all these statements I've made are true, blah blah blah, and I conform to all local, county, state, and federal law, right? So say in your case this might not be true, but let's say and assuming I'm being honest, I make all my money as a trimmer, right? And I put that as, again, I'm being honest, I write it on my application. Well, that source of income is federally illegal, right? So if you answer that you attest to it, have you just committed bank fraud? If you don't answer it honestly, you have in fact committed bank fraud. And lastly, if that is my sole source of income, can that loan now be packaged and sold to Fannie or Freddie, which like 90% of mortgages in America are packaged up and sold into these pools? Can that loan now still be pooled and sold to a federal agency, which it technically is right now? It's owned by the Treasury. The answer is no one knows. Like that has never been officially addressed anywhere that I'm aware of. Now, don't get me wrong, and this is where the good news. This is why I started the good news. Obviously, it happens, right? like there's something like 400,000 people employed by the legal cannabis business. I imagine a few of them have mortgages, and I imagine a few of those were sold to Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah.
The problem comes in, and I think this is what you're asking. Say I was to pick up the phone and call a federal agency of some sort. And I asked them, hey, I've got an applicant. His income is that he's a master grower for a state legal cannabis business. Can I package that loan and sell it to your agency? They won't say yes. And I know this because that happens on the banking level. right? If I were to call any number of regulators on the federal level and ask them, hey, is it okay if I ban cannabis? They won't say yes. Now, they won't say no, but they won't say yes. So what do you do?
Yeah. What do you do?
Well, in a banking case, luckily we do have FinCEN 2014 guidance, so we have something to hang our hat on. This is why safer banking has been a hot topic, is that they want to memorialize this in an actual law and say, okay, this is real now. Like we can do this.
If somebody were to call you and say, hey, Peter, I need help, I need a loan,
Yeah.
what would be your advice?
Oh, well, it depends on the scenario. It depends on a number of details. In almost all cases, I've been able to assist. So I welcome the call if your viewers are looking for that. But I'm sorry, you mean a person or a business?
Person. A
person?
person that works for a business and they're now buying a house, for example.
Yeah, yeah. In almost every case that I've been involved in, that it's worked out. I've been able to find a solution for that. So I have to assume it's either so there's a number of scenarios. Either the bank then is saying, well, then I just won't sell it. I'll hold it. They call it a portfolio loan. Now you can't sell the note. You have to hold it.
Oh, okay,
or,
got it.
Or something else is happening in the background.
Got it. So, do you have a lot of people that work in the industry bank with Hanover?
Yes. It's actually pretty common because what winds up happening is most banks, every bank that I'm aware of, will run, periodic like monitoring. There's any number of like monitoring softwares that like trigger red flags, keyword searches. So let's say, and this actually happened in mass. I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that, when New York State released its first batch of like licensee names. I suddenly got flooded with a bunch of calls because what happens is, so say you have an LLC, right? Peter Sue LLC. I can walk into any bank and say, oh, I'm opening an account for Peter Sue LLC. What do you do? Well, we're going to open a retail store. Technically true. And generally speaking, that shouldn't be a problem anywhere. However, fast forward 2 years, a list comes out from New York State that says Peter Sue LLC is a licensed cannabis dispensary. That if it triggers on some sort of a monitoring software, now the bank is going to close my account, and when they do that, they'll close all your accounts. So if you've got a personal account, your signers on like I actually heard a story where a person was a signer on like the church's account or something like that, right? And that account got closed too. So yeah, it's actually pretty common. I get the businesses coming and then they say, well, I may as well open a personal account here.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's probably a really good spot for anybody listening that works in the industry that really wants to bank in this industry, to find a bank like Hanover that really truly services the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I think, personal banking, believe it or not, is one of the most stickiest, is what we say, forms of banking. Because once you've got your direct deposit set up there, I mean, you know how it is. Like when somebody has their
I
payroll
have the
set
same
up,
bank since I was 15.
I know. It's that the inertia is so high, and they have endless studies about this. The data shows that like once you get that person to open an account, if it's an operating, meaning a person's operating account, they're putting payroll through there, they got bills going through there, credit card payments is set up. Like the inertia is so high, So yes, it's I get it. It's hard for a person to close their account, move to a new one. But if that decision gets forced on you, that's a bad situation.
It's good to be proactive too, I say, especially if you're in that stage in life where you're buying large, amounts of things that require capital and financing.
Yeah. I mean, I think at a minimum, think of it as an alternative, right? Like if you've got your primary accounts at one of the big four banks, keep it there, no problem. But do think about the fact that like it's really not that much of a lift for you to just open a personal account, put a little bit of money in there. And this way, God forbid something happens there, you're not like now scrambling for a solution.
What's What what are you planning over the next few years with your banking program?
Oh, sure. Sorry if this is not a juicy response, but because my whole mantra is, treat cannabis like normal, the reality is my vision is just to keep doing more, right? So I've got, again, my primary market is New York, so most of my accounts, most of my licensees are startups. As they grow, they're going to be looking for more services, lending, for example, and more to the point, they'll start being able to qualify for those things. And that's what I want to do. I want to be that full service bank, catch them full life cycle. So, like I said, just treat them like normal customers of the bank.
That's great. So how long does the business need to be, and what do they need to show before they can open a facility, a line?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, normal traditional bank underwriting is actually super simple, right? Assuming they're a cash flow lender like we are, we really just need to know, we just want to know two things really, right? Like, does the business make enough money to service the debt? Can it afford the debt that it's asking me for? And what happens if it goes wrong? So defaults. In other words, some sort of collateral. Although I would say that that's part of the biggest challenge in cannabis banking, cannabis financing, is that your typical cannabis business actually doesn't fit in your traditional underwriting box. Because let's say your most valuable asset is the license, right? You can't put a lien on it, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Depends on the state. Some states
Yeah.
allow it. New York does not. Now, even if you could put a lien on it, what is the trade value of that license, right? So as an example, in New Jersey, I know that I can lend money to a liquor store, right? So liquor license. And I know that if that loan goes bad, I can dump that license for like 140 grand. I know almost exactly how much, right? It's about 140 grand. So I've put a bottom on that loan. You're a good customer here. I see good cash flow. You say, hey, I'm looking for $250,000 on an inventory line. I say, well, I'm really only taking risk on 100 or so thousand. Not bad. Versus cannabis, the risk is unlimited.
Oh, that's interesting. And also, I mean, if you think about the cannabis industry, you have the license and you have inventory. Well,
Yeah. Well, inventory
probably
also
not going to affect inventory, right?
right. Your most common forms of financing. So something collateralized, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard. It's hard to do. Receivable financing, right? Your typical store has no receivable, and even if you had receivables, your counterparties are going to be other cannabis businesses, right? Logically, and then of course inventory.
But that's actually great news these are the steps that you foresee as businesses mature in the New York market where you guys are from. They're going to grow and they're going to need certain facilities.
Yeah.
Just normal. Before I let you go, I have to ask this question. You're in the industry. You've been in the industry for a while. And this is an opportunity for you to crap on other banking solutions. What don't you like about the banking industry today and what's being offered?
Oh, okay. Well, you probably know there's a lot of sort of almost every institution that I'm aware of probably uses some sort of a back end program. This is true of banking in general, by the way, not just cannabis banking. But in cannabis banking, there's a few providers that are key to the compliance backbone of just about every cannabis banking program that's available. Maybe not every one, but and therein lies the rub. Because if that program has friction built in, it trickles down. If that program has costs built in, obviously that trickles down. To say that I don't like it is probably taking the case too far, but my basic answer is like the costs, the capability, and like the friction that those systems introduce is actually what's the pain point that a lot of cannabis companies have today.
Oh, I had no idea that they adopt a system in the back end that's limiting.
Yeah, so let me give you an example without naming names. So there is a program out there that is heavily predicated on POS data.
Mm.
So a couple of things to consider. What that means that if you're a bank and you're using this system, well, unless your customer happens to be retail, meaning POS, right? Well, that system's kind of useless, right? Two, pulling POS data, now you almost have too much information. And once you have that information, you got to do something with it. So as an example, let's say, for example, every dollar that's going through the POS, right? And you do because you're getting the POS data. Now, if the retailer decides, you know what, I'm okay with keeping some cash. I'm just going to recycle it, right? But the bank has so much data and knows exactly how much cash you're deciding to keep. So the bank may decide, well, that's too much, right? So the point is, you're creating a friction that doesn't need to be there. Like under normal circumstances, I don't know what my retailers hold. Outside of cannabis, if my supermarket customer decides I'm good with holding this cash, that's their prerogative. That's their business, provided that there's no money laundering. Obviously, I'm not supporting that. What I mean is, a retailer deciding that these cash is fine for me to hold on to, that should be up to the entrepreneurs. That's his or her right. But if the system forces me to do something about it, and I have that data, I do have a problem where I can see someone coming in and saying, well, you've got an anomaly here. What made you decide that it was okay for them to keep this much cash?
Who decides what system to adopt, or who decides? Is that an individual bank? They decide, hey, we're going to need this for more clients?
That vendor due diligence, yeah. Like it's just probably by committee.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I've heard horror stories of what some banks require.
Yeah.
And
like you mentioned, financial statements, for example. Why are you asking for financial statements? Because you bought a system that said you need to collect financial statements.
yeah, well, for me, it's like, if you're not loaning that person anything,
Oh, sure.
and they don't owe you any money,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Then why do you need financial statements? I don't get it. What risk do you have?
Yeah.
How does that kind of fit into open or maintaining a bank account?
So I have two answers for you. One, I agree with you. Two, it's one of the FinCEN guidance. It talks about that the business is a front for cartels, et cetera, et cetera. And so how do you know that? Well, you collect the financial statements, you compare it to transactions in the bank.
Gosh. Okay, so there is some rationality behind this madness.
Sort of. I mean, again, you wouldn't do that normally, right? To your point, unless there's a trigger for it, or you are lending them money.
Got it. So the FinCEN guideline, just a brief history, is it particularly for high-risk businesses?
Oh no, it's specific to cannabis, which is why
Okay.
financial institutions will look at that as
The guidance.
implied permission to bank cannabis, even though it doesn't explicitly say that.
Got it.
Like it's
Okay.
actually called, BSA expectations for banking cannabis or something like that. I forget.
So
exactly.
how did you come up with the rationality in terms of what you guys need to service the industry?
Oh, I mean, I think at this point it's become part of the zeitgeist, right? The reality is now you have many years of history, people going through bank exams. Like the first bank that did it, the first credit union that did it, like I'm sure they were sitting on pins and needles because at some point you created all these rules and regs, but at some point you got to go through an exam, right?
Yeah.
So a third party is going to come in and judge you for what you did. But by the time that person has gone through multiple exams and other people are looking like, well, so and so did it, and now you have like publicly traded banks that actually talk about it on their quarterly reports and stuff like that. So to say that I came up with it is definitely, I definitely don't want to take credit. We're really following the herd, honestly. it's easier for newcomers to point at successful programs and say, look, we did everything they did, and
Yeah.
they've gone through 5 bank exams, right? Like, why are you hassling me? You know?
Oh, that's fascinating. That's more or less like going through a 280E audit.
Yeah,
Really, you
yeah,
have precedent, and
that's right.
you just point that this has worked. That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Like banking can be very much a herd mentality, right? So and so has done it. So yes, the pioneer, the first few that did it, those are the guys that took the arrows.
Peter, before I let you go, you're part of the Asian Cannabis Roundhouse Committee
Roundtable, yeah.
Roundtable.
Yeah.
Why? So, what is this all about?
Oh, sure. Well, so the Asian Cannabis Roundtable started out very grassroots. It was literally so Kristen Jordan, our founder, she was one of the early adopters here in New York. I mean, literally going up to Albany, lobbying for the what later became the MRTA, the law that legalized cannabis in New York, the MRTA. So, frankly, back then it was literally just her and her buddies like hanging out and like talking thoughts about legalization, things like that. Later, she approached me and said, "Hey, we want to get, create a real organization." I think about it pretty simply. So past, present, future, right? I think in the cannabis, in the Asian culture, the older generation, so past, I find that there is a heavy stigma for cannabis, and it's a very negative stigma, generally speaking. In fact, in Chinese, in Mandarin, in English, you have the word drug, which could mean medicinal or narcotic. In Mandarin, there's a word for drug, yao, and the word that you use for narcotics is actually poison. So 毒片 or 毒药. So in other words, as a Chinese kid, you would grow up referring to cannabis as poison.
Wow.
So to some extent, wanting to change that, right? Change that perception in the community. So the present, of course, is just, in a fairly literal, pithy sense, like, hey, Asians working in cannabis, we want to come together, put the Asian voice at the table, etc. Uplift Asian businesses. You go to these conferences and you want to feel like, hey, there should be Asian speakers. We have experts that can represent Asian voices, etc. And then, of course, the future. You and I might not feel like, I need to join an organization to meet other, Asian professionals. But there's probably some kid that's trying to get into the industry that thinks like, how do I do this? How do I meet Tommy? How do I meet Peter? And we want to provide a safe space for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's the future.
Yeah, that's brilliant to hear. I knew that cannabis became more accepted when I first smoked with my dad. Growing up, he would have murdered me. But, we shared a session together and enjoyed cannabis together. I'm like, okay, well, things are turning around. If he, got over that stigma, then we're going somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. Maybe it's the opium wars or whatever. But like in Asia, well, think of it this way: in like China, for example, cannabis is still a capital offense. Like you get executed for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's crazy. I think that's the same in Vietnam. I
yeah,
think.
yeah. What's interesting though is words have power, right? Like again in Mandarin, so the word for cannabis is ma. The word for hemp is da ma. So it's like it's very it's like just change it. You just modify the word, and suddenly it's totally okay.
So what's a dama? What does that mean?
So ma refers to, I'm sorry, I said it backwards. So ma refers to the plant, right? So cannabis.
Yeah.
So if we were getting scientific, like cannabis sativa is referred to as ma, but we think the way we in English you think of hemp, right? So you could have ma bu, which is a hemp cloth, but da ma is marijuana.
Mm.
Now you and I know it's the same plant,
Yeah.
but the cannabis, the marijuana, is referred to as dama, which means it's psychoactive.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
yeah.
Peter, before I let you go, where can our listeners find you?
Oh, sure. I think the easiest way would be to find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn, Peter Su. I have, you know, I think I'm active and I do respond to DMs.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. You dropped a ton of knowledge.
Cool.
Anybody that's listening, please hit Peter up. If you're looking for a loan in the cannabis industry,
I don't want to overpromise that, but yes, I'm happy to help.
well, if you're qualified, let's just say that. Your credit score is good.
Yeah. That's a different question. Yeah, do you qualify?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tommy.
I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. If you're obtaining a loan or you have difficulty obtaining a loan, contact Peter. He's your man. He can help you, hopefully. Until next time, guys. Oh, wait. Happy International Podcast Day, everyone. I did not know this day existed, but here we are. And I'm so grateful. Huge, big thank you to you, the listeners, for giving us the opportunity to bring on an expert guest week over week to share tips and advice on how to scale businesses. Without you, none of this would be possible. We've had a ton of amazing episodes over the last 2 years, and there's many more to come. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening for updates on when the next pod will drop. Again, big thank you. Thank you so much for supporting us. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access the full archive of episodes from the show.